3 weeks, one controller and a master rank later. Not because it made me better, far from it, but because it kept me playing. The M Ultra Gen 2 has not moved from my desk since it arrived. Why this one stayed when others did not, that's the story here. Out of the box it ships with shadow hunting switches, so what you see here is stock, no mods. I used it as my only controller across PC and Switch 2 for like the past few weeks. The plan was simple, get C-Viper to master without swapping gear. That ranked push to master was mostly on PC. Every set, every adjustment, every win and every choke happened with this unit. The final round that pushed me into master looked very awful in particular. My hands absolutely did not want to do what I wanted them to do, but that has nothing to do with the controller. Whatever the case, I still got there in the end, so it's all good. But that's the point here. This is not a highlight reel, it's what 3 weeks of use actually looked like. Between ranked sessions, I ran a few rounds of 2xKO as well, just to put the pinky button to work as a tag button. That preference started in the Tokon Fighting Souls Beta on the R16. And it still makes sense to me. In Street Fighter 6, my Drive Parry sits on the left thumb. And that's the same in 2xKO now. So the defensive logic stays consistent between both games. For me, that makes this the perfect 2xKO controller. Left pinky on tag, parry on my left thumb. Meaning my entire left hand has a button for every finger. As that layout also matches Street Fighter 6, I don't have to rethink buttons between games. Granted, I don't have a gameplay pinky use case outside of tag games, where usually it's mostly navigational, but still. As for Tekken 8 in general, I've uninstalled it quite a while ago, so I didn't do any tests over there this time around. Convenience versus feel, that's the trade I had to choose. In terms of handling, feel and enjoyment, it beats the 8-bit Do for me. In terms of convenience, the 8-bit Do still wins. That 2.4 GHz mode for PC is just too good. However, the M Ultra Gen 2 brings back the dual USB-C layout from the S16. One at the top and one on the left. It stops cables twisting across the desk when I switch between the PC on my right and the PS5 for Switch 2 on my left. That is why I reworked my desk cable management, so the lack of wireless is less of a hassle. It bears mentioning that I rarely ever dock the Switch 2 for play, and I almost never turn on the PS5 these days, but having both ports available is still useful when it becomes useful. The Tokon Fighting Souls Beta was the last time I played on PS5 properly. And the next one in December will probably be the only other time this year where I'll plug the power cable back into it. I have a Booter 5 attached to it, and it works fine on PS5 as expected. But I mainly play on PC these days, and sometimes on Switch 2 in handheld mode. Tabletop mode, I guess. So it's there so I don't have to look for it when I finally do turn on the PS5 again, which is probably again in December, so I won't have to look for the Booter 5. The top port also has a locking mechanism. I honestly find it a bit annoying for home use. I don't play in tournaments, but it's there for a reason, and for that it does its job, so I can't fault it. To the left of the display are two switches. One disables all LEDs, the other locks non-essential buttons, so essentially your tournament mode. Functionally, it follows the usual Horde 42 and CosmoX pattern. Utility, that's what I call the web configurator, boot modes, profiles, macros, analog directional inputs, DDI, it's all present and all behaving as expected, so there's nothing new to mention here. The top row on the controller itself for some reason got reshuffled. I don't know why, but it did throw me off at first, so I remapped everything to match my other controllers. Context matters here, I suppose. While touch is up there as well, I actually use it as the physical button above down. I primarily use touch to reset training mode, and in matches it acts as my taunt button. Home only really gets used when I'm on PS5 or Switch 2. Turbo is my functions button when I need to switch profiles on the fly. The most important one is the options button, which I prefer having to the far right, because that's where it's always been. If it's anywhere else, I end up hitting half the top row before I find it, which is less than ideal. So yeah, that's the one button that I needed to be where it's always been. So really, that's also the only button that even made me realize that everything's been moved around up top in the first place. So if you don't care about this stuff, this shouldn't matter at all, but it bears mentioning that this button does sit somewhere else than it does on the other controllers. Hit like and subscribe if you're still reaching for the same controller weeks, months, or even years in. Also, tell me in the comments which controller you're currently using, and what single feature made it stick around on your desk. After a few weeks with it, a few build details did stand out. Unlike the R16 and T16, there is no creaking when you press, twist or lift the case. There's also an LED strip along the bottom edge. It doesn't add functionality, it's just for looks. The other lighting are just the usual per button LEDs. The bottom edge LED strip, however, makes the shell feel slightly warm on my lap. Not hot, it's just noticeable. It's November and cold, so that's fine for now. But maybe ask me again in summer. The bottom has 2 large rubber pads so it doesn't slide around. That's already better than the clear models, where you have to add your own rubber feet, which do come in the package, but you still have to add them yourself. Otherwise, the screws that you have on the bottom sides will mark the desk you're playing on or your trousers, or if you're wearing shorts for some reason, it will probably even nick your skin. This one doesn't do that, which is a great upgrade. I would still prefer a fully covered bottom. One of the few areas where the 8-bit DOE is genuinely better. The button sound is excellent. I still prefer how the R16 sounds, but the Gen 2 feels better and it's much quieter than the 8-bit DOE at least, which is a decibel monster obviously. Physically, it's roughly 30 by 20 by 1.35 centimeters if memory serves. Most buttons resemble the usual 24mm sizing. The up button is a little bit larger, similar to the standard that Hitbox had years ago. Because it's a washerless design, the actual measurements differ quite a bit. In feel and spacing, however, it's basically the same to me. So no learning curve needed to adjust. Speaking of, there is a slight curve towards the player side. I can't say if that's for ergonomic reasons or just for aesthetics. I don't rest my hands on levelers controllers while playing, so for me it doesn't add anything. The curve is very slight though, so I'm guessing it's just for aesthetics. Outside of fighting games, I tried Hollow Knight Silksong on Switch too. I know, weird at first glance. I usually play it on keyboard on PC and Mac, but it works surprisingly well here. For this, the R16 would have done just as well here, as I'm not using the left thumb button for anything. The only awkward part in the beginning is the up input. Using my left middle finger to slash upwards is a stretch at first, because the spacing is very different to a normal keyboard. But you adapt quickly, and it's unlikely that this would be your primary function anyway. As long as I'm not stuck with Joy-Cons, however, and the feel stays close to my PC and Mac setup, I'm more than fine with it. In fact, I'm quite happy with this. Across PC and Switch 2, it behaves virtually the same. No mapping quirks, no random disconnects, it's plug and play as you'd expect. Where it stumbles is on the Mac side. On Mac, Steam recognized it as 2 controllers, unless I set it to X input, but even then, games wouldn't take any input at all. I tested the S16 on the same machine. Firmware 7.11 and 7.12, both worked. The S16 also has dual USB-C, so that ruled out some sort of weird firmware quirk and the dual USB-C layout. But yeah, that's also one of the few tests that I could run to isolate the cause, but I couldn't find any solution. So as it stands right now, I cannot use that controller on a Mac. Weirdly enough, hardwaretester.com detects all inputs just fine. That points to Steam on macOS as the likely culprit. But as I don't have any non-Steam games on my Mac, that's my only working assumption that I have, as I can't test anything else. As usual, this is also just my experience. It could be a faulty unit or user error. Your results may differ. So where does that leave it after 3 weeks? I paid around 120 euros for it on AliExpress, and I've seen it dip below 100 since then. For what it offers, that's a great price in my opinion. If wireless convenience for PC is your priority, then the 8-bit DOE still makes more sense. If feel, layout, and a strong price to performance levelers controller with full customization through a web configurator matter, the Gen 2 is the one to go with in my opinion. So yeah, 3 weeks in, nothing broke, nothing frustrated me, and I still reach for it every single time I want to play. At some point, I might want to add a decal for artwork. Not really important, but I'll also have to figure out how that even works. Honestly, don't even know where to begin with that. That is 3 weeks with the M Ultra Gen 2. It feels natural to use, and that is why this controller stays on my desk. Well, back to rank then. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.